I have a question or two for each side here. Max Boot, you make the case that the alternative to unilateralism is isolation. Whatever happened to diplomacy?
If I gave you the impression that the alternatives are either unilateralism or isolationism, that's false. And in fact, I tried very hard not to give that impression, because what I talked about was not necessarily unilateralism. It was American global leadership. And as I said, we should try to act with allies wherever possible. We should certainly not go it alone unless it's absolutely necessary. But in certain circumstances, it is absolutely necessary. And even with allies, we cannot simply do what the herd wants. We have to provide leadership. We saw in the case of Bosnia, for example, in the early 1990s, what happened when American global leadership was absent. And that was genocide occurring. And it was only when we stepped forward and mobilized our allies in the way that a policeman might mobilize a posse that we were able to be effective.
But, but the record for intervention is abominable when you think of the intervention in Vietnam, when we think of the intervention in Cuba. I mean, the list goes on, and in Chile.
Well, I would say to you that
places,
well, in the first place,
interventionists we may want to be, but inept we are.
Well, in fact, I would argue that a lot of our interventions have worked out reasonably well, and I think, for example, of World War II or the Gulf War, and more importantly, I think of the consequences of not intervening. For example, the fact that we did not intervene in Europe in the 1930s. I think that failure speaks for itself.
Well, in an age of atomic proliferation, reasonably well just isn't good enough, I guess. Laipson,
How many debaters do we have on the other side there?
You talk about engagement, but in the case of Iran, when the other side really has no interest in engagement, or North Korea has no interest in engagement, I mean, we can be out there engaging all we want, and nobody's accepting the ring.
Well, I think the North Korea and Iran cases are a category that's a little bit different than the requirement for a policeman, although Michael Mandelbaum put nonproliferation in this basket that we're talking about tonight. But both of those problems are being managed with, international cooperation. And even if the United States didn't want to engage initially with North Korea and still today with Iran, the reality is we have found interlocutors to engage with both, and that progress has been made in the six-party talks with North Korea. I certainly agree with you that Iran is in one of those very hard baskets, and engagement alone is not necessarily sufficient. There are circumstances in which coercive diplomacy, sanctions, there are other instruments of international politics that can be exercised. But I would argue that at least under today's circumstances, Iran is not. Iran has many policies that we do not like, but it is not playing the role of a belligerent that requires a military action right now.
What on earth can this cop on the beat, this American cop on the beat, do in a place like either Afghanistan or Iran?
Well, I'll tell you
other than stay there forever.
Sure. Well, I can tell you one thing it can do and has done straight away, which is that Afghanistan is no longer a base where there are open training camps where terrorists can train and come and attack cities like this one we're sitting in.
And the heroin
and that's I don't think that's a small achievement.
And the heroin business is booming.
I think that's a different
so
question.
The cop's out there. What's he doing?
Well, hang on, if you let me finish. Well, I thought it was one question. Look, as I say, it's no small thing to get the first thing done, the thing that was originally why America and her allies went into Afghanistan, which was to take out flagrant training camps of terrorists. And that job has been done. Now, it seems to me that the job of sorting out the Afghan economy is a separate one which the world community generally is involved in. But I think that's a different point. I don't know if you want to try to make me an apologist for the American administration or a spokesperson for them, but I'm not.
Well,
my own view, for what it's worth on it, is that the job of creating a viable, booming economy in Afghanistan is a quite different one. Now, this particular policeman went in and sorted out the problem. It doesn't also have to be the social services department.
Ian Bremmer, you talk about a leader, a Führer out there, someone who's going to, some big pie in the sky who is going to suddenly have the world bowing down and saying, we want to follow you, leader, whoever that may be. I mean, this is wonderfully kind of anti-Orwellian stuff you're saying, but what leader? What single leader is the world going to follow? America can't follow a single leader.
Well, historically, that's certainly true. America can't follow a single leader, but in terms of values and regimes, when we talk about, for example, free trade, the fact is we have an international system that the United States has been at the forefront of and has been pushing until some trends very recently has been pushing a very strong agenda of free trade. It's been seen as the global leader as a consequence. And whether we're talking about sort of international norms and regimes or whether we're talking about regional bilateral ones, that's been an extremely important process. The WTO, the World Trade Organization, the United States has played a leadership role. The U.S. is the world's largest economy, has helped to smooth and create many, many efficiencies. If you want to talk about what happened after the Soviet Union collapsed, if you want to talk about the efforts to denuclearize places like Belarus and Kazakhstan and Ukraine, the U.S. took a leadership role. That clearly made the world a more safe place. That's very different from talking about being the world's policeman. I think that there are a lot of countries that do criticize when the U.S. doesn't take a leadership role. Look at the tsunami in Indonesia. The Chinese put $4 million on the ground about a week afterwards. The United States got the Japanese, the Indians, and the Australians together, billions of dollars, in this case, boots on the ground providing humanitarian assistance, and actually made a serious difference. The United States is clearly indispensable in these roles as a leader, but I would not say that the U.S. has the capacity to be the global policeman.